Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be taking a look at a news report that came out of Nigeria,
Mm.
specifically Borno. We've been covering the fight against Boko Haram and ISWAP
Right.
for quite a while now. And this new report from Vanguard and GR.com, it gives us a pretty sobering look at just how complex and dangerous this conflict really is.
Yeah.
So the headline here is that 34 terrorists were, quote unquote, eliminated, but 6 soldiers, sadly, lost their lives.
Yeah.
And that right there it really kind of brings home the human cost of this conflict.
Yeah.
We hear about these clashes,
Right.
but it's important to remember that on both sides,
Absolutely.
there are people who are fighting and dying and, families who are grieving.
Yeah, the toll it takes on everyone involved.
Exactly.
It's significant. And it's also important to remember that the soldiers serving in Borno are operating under some incredibly difficult circumstances. I mean, we're talking about dense forests, remote villages, difficult terrain that really offers a lot of tactical advantages to groups like Boko Haram and ISWAP.
It makes me wonder, where exactly is Borno within Nigeria? Like, help me place this
Sure.
geographically. What makes this area such a hotbed for this type of activity?
So Borno State is located in the northeastern corner of Nigeria, and it's right there on the border of Lake Chad.
Okay.
And it's a region that's been dealing with, unfortunately, like a lot of poverty, lack of opportunity, for decades now.
Mhm.
And when you combine those factors with, kind of porous borders and a sense of marginalization from the central government, it creates, unfortunately, a breeding ground for these extremist groups.
Yeah, and it's disheartening to see how all of these factors, kind of interweave
Yeah.
and contribute to the instability there.
Mm.
Now, the report doesn't go into a ton of detail about the actual clash itself, but it does mention that the troops, quote unquote, engaged the terrorists in a firefight.
Right.
Knowing the terrain you just described,
Yeah.
how do these encounters typically unfold?
Well, you have to remember that Boko Haram and ISWAP, they often use guerrilla tactics.
Hmm.
And they exploit their familiarity with the area to launch these kind of, hit and run attacks.
Yeah.
They'll pop up, they'll attack,
Yep.
and then they just melt back into this very dense and difficult to navigate landscape.
Right, so they know the land,
They do.
and the military is kind of coming in
Yeah.
blind in a sense,
To a certain extent, yeah,
and it makes it incredibly hard to counter them.
exactly.
And I noticed, and it's something we've talked about before on the show,
Yeah.
the report uses the word eliminated
Mm-hmm.
when referring to the terrorists,
Mm-hmm.
not killed,
Yeah.
which, makes me wonder about the language that's used
It's a good point to bring up.
in these reports.
Yeah.
Is it a way to be more objective, or is it sanitizing the reality of the violence?
I think it's a really important question because, some might argue that eliminated is just a more objective term, but, it does kind of make you question if it's maybe downplaying the real human cost,
Yeah.
the violence, and it kind of underscores the challenges of reporting on conflict in general.
Right.
It's how do you balance the need for accuracy with the need to be sensitive to the gravity of the situation?
It is a tightrope walk.
Yeah.
But stepping back for a second, where does this clash fit into the larger fight against terrorism in the region?
It's a good question and a complicated one, I think.
Yeah.
On one hand, the fact that the military was able to neutralize a significant number of terrorists, it does suggest that there's some success happening.
Mm.
But at the same time, the loss of life, on the side of the military,
Right.
it really underscores how challenging this fight is and the fact that it's far from over.
So a bittersweet victory, if you will.
Yeah, yeah.
And that begs the question, what does a lasting solution even look like in a place like Borno? Military action, as we've seen, it's just not enough.
Yeah.
So, what else can be done?
That is the million-dollar question. A lot of experts believe that focusing on addressing the root causes,
Yeah.
Things like poverty, lack of opportunity, that sense of marginalization,
Right.
that might be a more effective long-term strategy. There have been some programs, aimed at providing vocational training, economic empowerment,
Mm-hmm.
but they've been met with, mixed results.
Yeah.
And it's a very slow and difficult process.
It does give us all a lot to think about. This clash in Borno, while it's just one event,
Yeah.
it really sheds light on the complexities of the fight against terrorism,
Mhm.
and that finding a path to to sustainable peace, it requires more than just military might.
Yeah,
It requires addressing those deeply rooted issues that fuel these conflicts in the first place.
exactly.
And I'll leave our listeners with this question. Knowing what we've discussed today about the situation in Borno, what do you think needs to happen for real, lasting change to occur? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me.